The alarm went off at 4:47 inches the morning. Not because Daniel Mercer set it for 4:47, he'd set it for 5. But the old radiator in the corner of the bedroom had rattled itself loose again sometime around 4, and the cold crept under the blanket the way it always did in November, slow, patient, certain. By 4:47 he was already lying on his back staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked, if he tilted his head, vaguely like the state of Ohio. He reached over and silenced the alarm before it woke Cora. That was the thing about being a father. You stopped sleeping deeply somewhere around the time your child was born, and you never really started again. Part of your brain stayed alert, listening through walls, cataloging sounds, the difference between a cough that meant nothing and one that meant fever. The difference between a nightmare cry and a real one. Daniel had been cataloging sounds for 8 years. He was very good at it. He dressed in the dark, work jeans with a patch on the left knee, a thermal undershirt, his father's old flannel that had faded from red to something closer to rust. He tied his boots in the kitchen so the sound wouldn't carry, standing on the cold linoleum in the half-dark with the coffee maker gurgling on the counter. Outside the window, the parking lot of Birchwood Apartments was still and gray. A shopping cart sat alone under the one working street lamp, listing slightly to the left, like it had given up. He drank the coffee standing up. He did most things standing up these days. There didn't seem to be enough time to sit. Daniel Mercer was 34 years old, though people occasionally told him he looked older, which he took as a reasonable assessment rather than an insult. He had broad shoulders that came from years of actual physical work rather than a gym, and hands that bore the specific roughness of a man who spent his days under car hoods. He worked 6 days a week between 2 jobs, morning shifts at Porter's Auto and Repair on 5th Street, and evening delivery runs for a logistics company that paid $12 an hour and didn't offer benefits. On the rare Sundays he had completely free. He did odd mechanical jobs for neighbors in the building who knew he'd do it cheaper than a shop and better than a YouTube tutorial. He had been doing this for 3 years. Before that, he'd been doing it while Claire was alive. While she was sick. While she was dying. He'd kept the same schedule through the hospital visits, through the experimental treatments their insurance wouldn't cover, through the long quiet months when they both knew how it was going to end, and neither one of them said it out loud, because saying it felt like opening a door they couldn't close. Claire died on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 years ago. Cora had been 5. She'd been at school. Daniel didn't talk about this much. There wasn't space in the day for it, and there wasn't anyone he trusted enough to say it to. And honestly, and he knew this wasn't healthy, he'd heard it from the counselor. He'd seen twice, and then stopped going to. Because of the cost, there wasn't time to feel it the way it needed to be felt. So it sat in him, somewhere low and permanent, like a stone in deep water. Present. Not going anywhere. Not hurting the way it used to, but not gone either. Cora was 8 now. She woke up 20 minutes after he did. Padding into the kitchen in her socks and her pajamas that had cartoon planets on them. Saturn with its rings, Jupiter in red and white, a crescent moon. Her hair was exactly like Claire's, dark and wavy, and perpetually escaping whatever he tried to do with it. "You made the good coffee," she said, climbing onto the stool at the counter. "The only coffee. You put 2 scoops instead of 1. That's the good coffee." He poured her orange juice. "How do you even know that?" "I watched you." He set the glass in front of her. "You're supposed to be asleep." "I heard the radiator." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the particular expression she had that reminded him painfully of Claire Patient, slightly amused, like she was waiting for him to catch up to something she'd already figured out. He'd have to fix the radiator again this weekend. He'd fixed it twice already. The building super was supposed to have someone look at it, but the super was also supposed to have fixed the bathroom exhaust fan 6 months ago, and that still rattled like a box of marbles every time someone showered. They ate breakfast together. Toast with peanut butter. Half a banana each. Cora had a habit, which she'd had since she was very small, of saving the last bite of whatever she was eating and offering it to him. He always took it. It had started when she was 3, and he'd mentioned once that he liked banana, and she'd decided, apparently permanently, that the last bite was his. He had never told her this made him want to cry. "Mrs. Hartwell said we're going to do a science fair," Cora said. "Yeah? I want to do something about bridges. Bridges, how they hold weight. With the triangles. She held her toast up at an angle to demonstrate something that was not especially triangular. I looked in a book about it. She looked in books about most things. This was not something Daniel had taught her. It was something she'd arrived at on her own. The same way she'd arrived at her hatred of the color orange, too aggressive, she'd explained, when she was 6, which he thought was a very sophisticated reason to hate a color, and her love of thunderstorms, which she watched from the window with an expression of pure contentment. We can look online for the right materials, he said. This weekend. Sunday? Sunday. She took a bite of toast, considering. Can we get donuts too? We can get donuts too. She gave him the last bite. He dropped her at school by 8:15. He watched her go through the doors with her backpack planets on that too. A matching set he'd bought at the discount store on Clement Street, and he watched the doors close behind her, and then he sat in the parking lot for a moment longer than he needed to. He did this every day. He didn't know exactly why. Some residual reflex, maybe some version of the old fear that the world was unreliable, and people could leave it without warning. He watched the door and made sure she was inside. And then he drove to work. Porter's Auto and Repair was a 12-minute drive from the school, and 8 minutes from the apartment. And Daniel knew the route so well, he could have driven it in his sleep. Maybe had, some mornings. The garage was owned by Frank Porter, 61 years old, ex-Navy. Deeply conservative taste in music, he kept a small radio on the workbench that played only classic country and sometimes, on Fridays, easy listening. Frank paid Daniel fairly, which in his experience was not something you could take for granted, and Frank did not ask personal questions, which in his experience was even rarer. There were 3 other guys at the shop. Marcus Webb, who was 26, and saving up for a motorcycle that everyone agreed he was going to destroy himself on. Tommy Griffith, 43.